Hi, everyone. This is Nancy Chanteau, and I'm here to talk to you about being good enough and how being good enough and not being good enough function internally in our culture, how we end up relating with these ideas, and how they end up producing really life draining and internally oppressive beliefs and structures that turn into stories, habits, practices, embodiment, and the way we feel and think about ourselves. And to talk about where that comes from in our culture and what we can do about it. This video is part of the Crossing the Threshold class, and if you're enjoying it, you can watch the rest of the playlist on this class and learn more about what I mean when I say crossing the threshold. When we talk about not being good enough, we're beginning our whole conversation is engaging with a concept of enough, which has to do with value. So, who is in charge of and what is being enough? And who is in charge of and deciding when somebody isn't enough or something isn't enough? That sense of valuation and a sense of scarcity is inherent in this model. There's a kind of a competition inherent in the idea of enough and not enough. And as soon as we enter into this valuation system, we're commodifying, we're objectifying, we're turning the self, the human being that we are, into something that is evaluated on some sort of valuation system or spectrum, where we could be good enough if some set of conditions external to us were reached, and we're not good enough because we have not yet reached those conditions because we don't feel good. We don't feel okay inside of ourselves. And so, as a result of that, that must mean that we have not yet earned that which is out there to earn, that we're not good enough in some way. And that not being good enough is the mechanism by which we end up feeling bad. So, and good and bad is in this construction as well. So there's this sense of enoughness, which is a valuation system, which is based on some sort of criteria. Who knows what they are? We can reach for those criteria, but it's actually not well defined. There isn't a moment at which you cross some sort of line and then you're enough. Or if there is that moment, we know it by not being there yet. And there is a sense that other people have it, but we don't. So we might evaluate other people as being enough, but not ourselves. So there's this comparison, competition, scarcity, engagement. Already we're in this valuation system, and then we're on a spectrum and we're relatively good enough or not good enough. And this sense of good is also in there. So there's a sense of not being good enough, being not good, being bad. So we are in a dualism and a sense of right or wrong, good or bad, rather than right and wrong, good and bad. And the sense of kind of subjective criteria, evaluations that are based on, what we like to say for non-dualism is right for me, right for you, wrong for me, wrong for you, depending on the context. That I could enjoy something right now that I wouldn't enjoy later. You could be enjoying something right now that I'm not enjoying, that later we could switch and you could stop enjoying that thing and I could start enjoying that thing. The context, who we are, our point of view, all of those things matter to how we evaluate something. That level of subjective, discerning ability to tolerate paradox and contradiction, we call that non-dualism, and we're thinking about non-dualism as being many truths rather than a truth. So there isn't a single point of view on the truth. There's a perspective, a series of perspectives that compose a truth that is inclusive of all truths. So the truth of truths versus a capital T truth, that there's some outside force that's determining whether or not something is true. And we'd really, it would solve a lot of problems if there were these fixed notions of good and bad, fixed notions of right and wrong that never change and that are completely objective criteria that everybody can agree on. Unfortunately, we don't live in that world. So we're operating this not good enough energy. We're operating within, we're, the very notion of it takes us into an objectified, commodified distance from our beingness. So it's alienated from our inherent intrinsic belonging. And in the context of belonging on the planet or being part of the wholeness included, um, there's a separation that's happening when we're experiencing not good enough. Now, this emerges inside of us, this feeling of not being good enough emerges inside of us in response to experiences where we feel powerless. Our feelings of powerlessness when we're infants are the same thing as feelings of danger. We experience danger, we're powerless over that experience, and that danger, obviously, if we cry and we don't get picked up and taken care of, we could die as infants. So danger and powerlessness are exactly the same thing. But as we grow up, we can experience powerlessness that is not dangerous to us anymore. That doesn't mean that danger and powerlessness, when we experience danger, we're usually experiencing powerlessness, but when we experience powerlessness, we're often not experiencing physical danger anymore, or even social danger. There's a sense, the sense of powerlessness got wired together with our sense of danger when we were infants, but we never unwired it. And so we feel not good enough when we encounter our experiences of feeling powerless. And we feel powerless all the time. We feel powerless over how we feel, much less how anybody else feels. Other people's feelings, other people's stories, other people's experiences are certainly out of our control. Even our own feelings, stories, and experiences can be somewhat out of our own control. And, we can wish we had a different experience or a different story or a different feeling. So there's a lot of experiences of powerlessness for us to encounter. And this idea of not being good enough is a fantasy story that would help us. If we could be good enough, then we would feel okay, that we would be able to tolerate our powerlessness. Unfortunately, not being good enough is actually not an antidote. There's nothing in either being good or being enough, according to other people, that would produce a reduction in our experience of feelings of powerlessness. There's actually no reason to reduce our experience of feelings of powerlessness. It's appropriate for us to feel powerless over things that we cannot change. What we want to do instead is insert an acceptance of our experience of feelings of powerlessness, accepting the unacceptable, that things are happening, that we don't have control. And once we've accepted the unacceptable, then we can choose a response. We can do what we can. There's power in this, in accepting the unacceptable and then doing what we can. The immense power both of rest, that instead of trying to change things that we cannot change and spending all of that energy, we retain it. So suddenly, instead of running around trying to fix things that can't be fixed, we're just sitting still. And in that acceptance, we can observe. We observe ourselves. We observe the circumstances. And then when we choose to act, we can choose to do something that has a chance of making a difference. Doing nothing in that situation is something, because we're not running around trying to fix something we can't fix. That restoration of energy to us is immensely potent, because then we have energy when something that we could do shows up. And so that combination of not spending energy that we can't afford to spend because it's not producing a result, plus having the energy that we didn't spend available to us when something comes up that we could do that would make a difference, that seems magical. There's an immense shift in what's possible in our lives when we stop spending energy trying to do things and fix things that we cannot do or fix. And then having that energy available to us to do and change the things that we can do and can change. You can see how this over time becomes even more potent, because if we continue to stay energized and available and rested, instead of running around trying to fix things we can't fix and change things we can't change, when something that we can fix and we can change comes up, and we've stored a whole bunch of energy over time, cycles of this over and over and over again, we might have a lot of energy as opposed to none, or be in a deficit. And when we have a lot of energy as opposed to none, what we can do is vastly different. So, this idea of being good enough or not being good enough as a solution is delusional. It doesn't solve any problems. It keeps us trying to fix ourselves when there's nothing to fix. It keeps us from feeling our intrinsic sense of belonging. And it keeps us distracted from the things that we could do, the things that we could change. And those things are not even apparent to us because we don't have the energy to do them. So they pass us by. Or we might witness them and say, oh, if I had the energy, I could do that thing, but I don't have the energy. But it doesn't occur to us that if we weren't struggling with not feeling good enough about ourselves, we would be able to do that thing. That calculus doesn't actually exist because we can't feel it. We can't feel what it would feel like to have enough energy. And so this idea that we could do something to change our experience is true. Unfortunately, it's not true that there's something wrong with us. What's true is that the basic fundamental structure of feeling not good enough is in the way. It is the thing that we need to change. And that's an inheritance that we get from an individualistic culture that's over-focused on us being responsible for our experience, as if we somehow could magically change our experience by changing ourselves. This over-focus on ourselves is the problem. It's internalized oppression. There's a sense that there's something wrong with us that is driving us to spend a lot of energy trying to fix ourselves and wasting the energy that we have, that we could be doing something to make a change at the system level, make a change in our circumstances by retaining our energy. And that's not our fault. We're trained to do this in a culture that is over-focused, hyper-focused on individualism being the solution to all of our problems. In a collective culture, people don't end up with this same construction because they're not focused on the individual as the solution. They're focused on the collective as the solution. So then individuals don't feel sufficiently empowered to make the changes in their lives. They're very good at accepting the unacceptable and not good at taking individual action. And as a result of that, where a little bit of individual action might be able to significantly change a collective experience, there's nobody taking that individual action. The collective is trying to solve all of the problems of the collective, but everybody is operating as if the collective will do it when it requires individuals to take action within the collective in order to change the collective. And over in an individualistic culture, we're so busy trying to fix ourselves that we don't actually take collective action to make changes in the same way. Because we're drained, we're exhausted, we're depleted, because we're spending all of our energy trying to change things we can't, trying to change our experience of powerlessness. I hope that this analysis helps us point to the tension in the not good enough feeling. I'd like to propose that we just totally get rid of the idea of enough, because there isn't anybody deciding for us whether or not we're enough. There's no external marker. We belong because we're here. If you weren't here, you wouldn't belong. I like to say, if you, we use the language in Skills for Change and Radical Therapy of deserve to die as being this blanket understanding of this concept. And that the antidote to deserve to die is not deserve to live, no more than the antidote to not feeling good enough is feeling good enough. We don't want to put a positive Band-Aid on top of a wound that is actually constructed incorrectly. That's not helpful. What we want to do is get rid of the idea of earning or deserving. We want to get rid of the idea of enough. And honestly, we want to get rid of the idea of good or bad being something that is anything other than subjective. Good for me in this situation, bad for me in this situation, maybe good for me tomorrow, maybe bad for me tomorrow. So we're replacing this sense of context and this sense of perspective. That doesn't mean there isn't a morality. It doesn't mean there isn't collective value. There aren't values of generally good and generally bad for the collective. Things that, morality, we can engage with these questions, but we're trying to think of them in terms of perspective rather than in terms of fixed. They're not fixed values, they're contextual values. And if we get rid of good or bad and we get rid of enough, what are we left with? I like to say that if you get rid of the deserve, you just are alive or you're dead. Once you're alive or you're dead, once you are here or not here, you're either here or you're not. If you accept that you're here, you accept the unacceptable, that lots of things are going to happen and tons of them are going to be out of our control. Once we've accepted the unacceptable about that and gotten good at that, and we're restoring and retaining our energy, then we get to choose what we want to do, what what action can we take that is in our best interests, what can we learn that helps us act in the best interest of the collective. How do we even know what the best interests of the collective are without thinking about them for ourselves and making choices for ourselves, and then engaging with others and listening to them and helping to create a sense of collective that we're then helping to choose, making choices on behalf of. And of course, there's all kinds of risks associated with this, but this is happening all of the time. We're being run by an internalized oppressive injunction that there's something wrong and we need to fix it. And that is incredibly destructive of our life energy. So we want to dismantle this sense of being good enough. We want to dismantle the sense of deserving or earning and replace it with being. Replace it with belonging. You're here. You're alive. What do you want? What's 100% of what you want? And how do you figure all of that out within a context that's so oppressive? We have to make our power and the power of our environment transparent to us so that we can make better choices. And that's what we begin to do as we accept the unacceptable, dismantle this sense of being good enough, not being good enough. I hope this was helpful to you. Thanks very much for listening.